Fujifilm film simulations are undeniably brilliant and fun to use. And I'm not making this video to show you how to make digital images look like film, because they are fundamentally very different. But if you do want images that look a bit more natural, have a bit more character to them, and even feel a little bit nostalgic than your regular digital images, then this is where Fujifilm film simulations really shine. The Fujifilm community as a whole have been great over the years, coming together, sharing their different JPEG looks and custom settings. I even made a video last year sharing my custom film simulation recipe, which managed to get a lot more views than I thought. So over the recent months, I've been playing around with some custom settings, some different JPEG looks, and I've landed on one that I am really pleased with. So here I am again to share with you another perfect Fujifilm film simulation recipe. Fujifilm actually gave me the new X-S20 to play with for a month to talk more about their film simulations, as this camera leans into that feature heavily. With this top dial, you can actually switch between your simulations really easily. So with the custom settings I'll share in this video, I have made it work with 2 film simulations as your base. To my delight, the X-S20 does include the nostalgic negative film simulation, which has become a personal favorite of mine. And I've never been able to use it before because on my X100V, nostalgic negative isn't available. And for that reason, if you're an X100 shooter watching this video, worry not, because the recipe I'll share in this video also works well and is complementary with classic chrome. The film simulation I have the most fun using as the base is nostalgic negative. It provides those amber tinted highlights which help give your images that slight nostalgic feel. Like I just mentioned, if you don't have nostalgic negative, I find that classic chrome also looks really nice. Here's some very basic examples on screen so you can see the side-by-side differences. As you can see, it's pretty subtle and not too dramatic. I do like grain on my images to add a layer of texture, but not too much. Grain acts as a way of smoothing over your final image, making contrast areas, highlights and shadows work nicely together. I want this effect to be subtle, so I keep it on small and weak. For my previous film simulation recipe I made last year, I didn't do anything with the color chrome effects or color chrome effects blue. The colors on that recipe were a little bit less contrasty, maybe slightly more washed out. I was trying to go for more of a pastel look. Whereas with this recipe here, I want more color and I want more contrast. I want the images to have slightly more of a punch to them. So for that reason, I've selected both Color Chrome FX and Color Chrome FX Blue as strong. These Color Chrome effects provide a wider range of tones and deeper colors, which I'm really liking the look of. Moving on to white balance now, which in my opinion is one of the biggest variables to how your final JPEG will look. I've gone with auto white balance with a +2 red and -3 blue tint. Auto white balance is just appropriate for most situations, whether you're shooting inside or outside. The +2 and -3 tint also keep the image a little bit warmer as well. I've selected my dynamic range to be 200. I like to see details in the shadows and the highlights, but I don't want everything to be exposed perfectly. You know how when you take a photo on your phone and it looks a little bit clinical and a little bit unnatural? Yeah, I think having some dynamic range is good, but too much dynamic range, you lose contrast and you lose some of that character. I find that keeping this at 200 is a good balance of exposing most things correctly without it looking too clinical and unnatural. With the tone curve, I made one simple adjustment to go with -2 in the shadows. Because I shoot a lot of street photography and a lot of the time my subjects might be hidden slightly in the shadows, or maybe their faces are not perfectly lit, so if the shadows are too dark, I would lose too much detail. So just a subtle -2 in the shadows lifts the curve slightly. As you can see, this film simulation recipe is not black and white, so let's lean into the color a little bit more. I went with +2, and like most of the adjustments here, I want the image to be natural and not overwhelming, so just small tweaks seems to be the way to go. Onto the sharpness, I left at 0. One of the cool things about these JPEG looks is that they have a little bit of character to them, so by over sharpening the image at all, it might look a little bit clinical, so I just left sharpening where it is. High ISO noise reduction is left on 0. I don't feel the need to make any adjustments here. Talking about clarity now, and this is a funny little one because I want to use the effect. I think it looks good, but if you do adjust the clarity in any way, then there is a 1 or 2 second processing time when you press the shutter. For me, who does a lot of street photography, I sometimes take many different frames within 1 or 2 moments. I can't afford the time to wait for the clarity to process. So if you want to use clarity, I think it does look good, have a little play around, but for me, I've left it on 0. And to anyone at Fujifilm who might watch this video, why is that? It would be great if we could adjust the clarity and not have an effect on processing speed. For the exposure compensation, I go up just 1/3 of a stop. I would rather my JPEGs be too bright than too dark, so obviously feel free to adjust this as you see fit. But most of the time, I like the exposure to just be a little bit brighter than normal. For those interested in how I use the X-S20, I have it set up with a single point focus and sensor weighted metering. Your metering mode will affect how your scene is exposed. So if things are looking too dark or too bright, before you adjust any of the recipe settings, maybe have a look at what your exposure compensating is and your metering. Again, the different metering modes do affect how your JPEG will look. Just like with my X100V with the X-S20, I shoot in aperture priority pretty much the entire time, and then the auto ISO setting to maximum of 6400 with a minimum shutter speed of 500th of a second, and then another auto ISO setting which is again maximum of 6400 ISO, but then a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th. Just because sometimes if I'm indoors, then 500th of a second is a little bit too quick. I think that covers most of the recipe details, so I thought I would just finish this video by sharing some of my initial thoughts using the X-S20 since I've had it for about a month. This is a fantastic everyday camera and is marketed as a hybrid. I don't need to read out the spec sheet, but the video capabilities are really impressive, especially for such a small, lightweight camera. The X-S20 uses the same sensor as the famous X100V, but with the processor of the XH2S. So it does provide the quality images you'd expect, but just using it, it is noticeably quicker and smoother overall. If you need professional grade results, this can do it. If you want something fun to experiment Fujifilm JPEGs with, this is also perfect. I've thoroughly enjoyed using this camera over the last month. It's been very convenient and very effective to use. So big thanks to Fujifilm for making this video happen.